Hello server enthusiasts, welcome back. We're getting back into the Ubuntu Network Server course. In this version, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of user accounts and permission. It's all about controlling who does what on a server, so let's get started. User management is crucial for maintaining a secure and organized server. Each user on your system should have their own account and specific permissions. You don't want different users messing with your system at the same files. So let's get started by creating a new user. Open the terminal and type this command: sudo space add user, and then the username you want to add. So any name you come up with. Then it will prompt you for your password. Pick a good password and make sure that it's a really good password, because in the last video we opened up remote access, so we don't want strangers to log in. Make sure your password is good. Don't pick anything too simple. Now it will ask some more questions that are optional to enter. You don't have to enter all this information. It will ask you, is it correct? Press capital Y if it's correct. And now a new user has been added. So if you want to remotely log in, you can now log in with the new username. User has its own directory, so if we go to the home directory and list the folders, you'll see now there are two directories. Every user has its own directory for its files that he or she can interact with. Okay, let's get on to the next thing. If you want that your user can do sudo, because that is not the default. By default you can just log in as user, but you can't do anything as administrator. So if to grant your new user super user or sudo privileges, add them to the sudo group with this command. And now the new username. So now the new user will be able to use the sudo command. Now you don't want that for every user. For security reasons, some users shouldn't be able to do sudo, because maybe they are just not be able to do any system configuring. So to switch accounts, if you're, for example, now we are logged in as Frank, and maybe we want to be the new user, we type sudo space and then the new username. And you'll see now I am not logged in as Frank anymore. We can double check with the command who am I. And you'll see we are no longer Frank. So that's one way you can switch users. But of course, if you use SSH, remote access, you don't have to do that. You can just log into the user that you are. So let's talk about permissions and ownership. In Linux, everything is a file. Files have owners and permissions that dictate who can access and modify them. So to see the file permissions of a file or directory, type the command ls space -l. So this guy doesn't have any files. Let's go up a directory and then type ls space -l. And you'll see there's different owners. So we have the Frank directory, which is owned by Frank, and the Tux directory, which is owned by Tux. So every file, or even the folders here, with two different folders, are owned by different users. But there are also different permissions. So in the beginning of those two lines, you see some characters there, dr, w, xr, and so on. So these are permissions of folders and files. So let's go into the Tux directory again. Let's create a new file. So now we have a file called file. To change the permissions, let's make that file more clear. So we can remove a file with this command. And let's make some file name. So we have a file called file name. And now we don't see any permissions. So we type ls space -l. And now we see that there is some permissions there. And we can change those permissions. For example, to give the owner read and write permissions, you type the command chmod u plus rw file name. Now look again, and you'll see it's the same, because the first three characters are for the user, the second for the group, and so those are the same. So there's a lot more to permissions. We can change as well. So let's try with minus. And now look again. And okay, those permissions are now gone. The user can no longer read and write that file. So you can play around with permissions. It's a bit cryptic because you're using these characters U, R, W, and so on. But you can change settings for a file and folder. Who can read it? Can a user read it? Can a group read it? And so on. You can also change the ownership of a file or directory. So let's say we have this file. Let me clear the screen here. We have the file name. Let's say we want to change that to be owned by Frank instead of by Tux. You can type sudo. We have to be administrator, chown, and then the new owner name with the new group name and the file name. Now if we check again, we need to type the password for the administrator. Check again, and you'll see the file is now owned by Frank inside of the Tux directory. So we have just changed the permissions. To change it again, we just change it back. So the username and the group, and now it's owned by the same user again. Now directory permissions are a bit different. If you want to grant read, write, and execute permissions, you can use the commands chmod 777 with the directory name. So let's first create a directory. We created a directory with mkdir, and these have permissions as well. So let's say we want to give all the permissions, then we can type this chmod 777 folder, list it again, and you'll see now it has all the permissions. But you want to be cautious with this because altering permissions can give some security risks. So let's change those numbers. And you'll see the permissions have just changed again. So you can mess around with permissions for both files and folders. And it is a bit cryptic, cryptic to understand. So you have to check the manual on that. But it's something you can do for any file. So that is just a tip of the iceberg for user management and permissions. Mastering these skills is essential for maintaining a well-organized and secure server. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep your Ubuntu network service in top shape. If you have any questions, you can just ask me. Feel free to drop the questions. I'll catch you in the next video.